$2.5 trillion. That is how much money was sitting in the Federal Reserve's reverse repo facility 2 years ago. It was the largest emergency cash reserve in the history of the financial system, a giant shock absorber that kept the market stable, that kept the Treasury market functioning, that kept the entire financial plumbing from exploding. Today, that number is $480 billion. In 24 months, $2 trillion has been drained, gone, spent, absorbed by a government that borrows $2 trillion per year and a banking system that is hemorrhaging from the inside. The safety net that protected you from the next financial crisis has been slashed by 80%, and nobody told you. No headline, no breaking news banner, no warning from your financial advisor, because if the public understood what the reverse repo drain actually means, the panic would begin immediately. Bank runs, market crashes, a flight to hard assets that would shatter the paper financial system overnight. The reverse repo was the last line of defense, the final cushion between stability and chaos, and it is almost gone. When it hits zero, and at the current pace that happens within months, there is nothing left to absorb the next shock. No buffer, no backup, no safety net. Let me show you exactly what is happening, why it matters, and what comes next when the last cushion disappears. To understand why the reverse repo drain is the most dangerous financial development nobody is talking about, you need to understand what the reverse repo facility actually is and why it was created. Think of the financial system as a car. The engine is the economy. The fuel is money. The road is the markets. The reverse repo facility is the suspension system, the shock absorbers. When you hit a bump in the road, the shocks absorb the impact. You barely feel it. The ride stays smooth, the car keeps moving. But what happens when the shocks are gone? Every bump becomes a crisis. A small pothole can blow a tire. A speed bump can break an axle. The car becomes undrivable. That is what happens to the financial system when the reverse repo hits zero. Here is how it works, technically. The reverse repo facility is a mechanism where banks, money market funds, and other financial institutions park excess cash overnight at the Federal Reserve. They hand the Fed cash. The Fed gives them Treasury securities as collateral. The next morning, the transaction reverses. It is a safe overnight parking spot for money that has nowhere else to go. Why would institutions need a parking spot for cash? Because after 2020, the Federal Reserve printed approximately $5 trillion in new money. That money flooded the system. Banks had so much cash they literally could not use it all. They could not lend it. There were not enough borrowers. They could not invest it. Asset prices were already inflated, so they parked it at the Fed. By December 2022, the reverse repo facility peaked at $2.55 trillion. That represented excess liquidity in the system, extra cash, a buffer that could absorb shocks without disrupting markets. But here is what nobody explained to the public. That $2.5 trillion was not just extra cash. It was performing a critical function. It was absorbing Treasury supply. When the U.S. government sold new bonds to finance its deficit, the reverse repo provided the cash to buy them. Money flowed from the reverse repo into Treasury auctions. The government got funded. The market stayed stable. Interest rates stayed manageable. The reverse repo was secretly subsidizing the U.S. government's borrowing addiction. It was the hidden mechanism that allowed Washington to spend $2 trillion more than it earned without crashing the bond market. It was the invisible hand holding everything together. And now it is almost gone. The hand is withdrawing, the support is disappearing, and the bond market is about to feel gravity for the first time in years. Let me walk you through exactly how the drain happened, because understanding the mechanics tells you what comes next. Phase 1 ran from January 2023 to June 2023. The reverse repo declined from $2.5 trillion to approximately $2.1 trillion. A drop of $400 billion. The money flowed primarily into Treasury bills. The government was issuing massive amounts of short-term debt, and money market funds moved cash from the reverse repo into T-bills because T-bills offered slightly better returns. This phase was orderly, predictable, the market absorbed the transition smoothly, interest rates remained stable, no disruptions. Phase 2 ran from July 2023 to December 2023. The drain accelerated dramatically, from $2.1 trillion to $700 billion, a drop of $1.4 trillion in just 6 months. The money moved into Treasury auctions to fund the government's expanding deficit. But this time, the drain was not voluntary, it was necessary. The U.S. government was issuing record amounts of debt. The Treasury Department had to rebuild its cash balance after the debt ceiling standoff. They flooded the market with new bonds. The only pool of money large enough to absorb that flood was the reverse repo. During this phase, something alarming happened. Treasury yields started rising. The 10-year yield moved from 3.8% to nearly 5%. Mortgage rates spiked to 8%. The bond market was showing stress. The reverse repo drain, while providing the cash to buy bonds, was reducing the cushion so fast that the market was starting to wobble. Phase 3 is happening now. From January 2024 to today, the reverse repo has declined from $700 billion to $480 billion. The pace has slowed somewhat because there is less left to drain, but the direction is unchanged. Every week, more money leaves the facility. Here is what is terrifying about this phase. The drain is now interacting with Federal Reserve quantitative tightening. The Fed is simultaneously selling bonds from its own portfolio. It is reducing its balance sheet by $60 billion per month. That means the Fed is adding supply to the Treasury market while the reverse repo is providing less demand. Supply up, demand down. That is the recipe for a bond market crisis. Let me give you the current math. The U.S. government needs to sell approximately $2 trillion in new bonds this year to finance the deficit. It also needs to refinance approximately $8 trillion in existing debt that matures this year. That is $10 trillion in total bond issuance. At the same time, the reverse repo has only $480 billion left to absorb. The Fed is adding $720 billion in supply through QT. China is dumping treasuries. Japan is selling to defend the yen. Foreign demand is declining. Where does the $10 trillion come from? Who buys the bonds? The reverse repo provided the answer for the last 2 years. That answer is almost gone. When the reverse repo hits zero, the financial system enters uncharted territory. There are no more shock absorbers. Every bump becomes a crisis. Here is what happens next in 3 stages. Stage 1. Treasury market dislocation. Without the reverse repo to absorb new bond supply, Treasury auctions will face reduced demand. When demand falls short, bond prices drop. When bond prices drop, yields spike. We got a preview of this in October 2023 when the 10-year yield briefly touched 5%. The reverse repo was at $1 trillion at that point. It could still cushion the blow. But at $480 billion and falling, the next yield spike will be worse, and the cushion will be thinner. If yields spike to 6% or 7%, the consequences cascade. Mortgage rates hit 9% or 10%. Housing freezes. Commercial real estate defaults accelerate. Government interest payments explode. The deficit gets worse. More bonds must be issued, which pushes yields higher, which makes the deficit worse. A doom loop. Stage 2. Banking system stress. Banks hold approximately $4 trillion in Treasury and agency securities. When yields spike, the value of those bonds drops. The unrealized losses that are already $684 billion grow larger. Banks manage their liquidity using the reverse repo as one of several tools. When excess cash was abundant, banks could easily meet withdrawal demands, handle payment flows, and maintain required reserves. As the reverse repo drains and excess liquidity disappears, banks must compete for deposits. They must pay higher rates. Their margins compress. The weakest banks, those with the highest unrealized losses and the most concentrated deposit bases, face the greatest risk. Regional banks with heavy commercial real estate exposure, community banks with limited diversification, the same profile as Silicon Valley Bank. When the reverse repo hits zero, the banking system will be operating without a safety margin. One unexpected shock, a major corporate bankruptcy, a geopolitical event, a failed treasury auction, could trigger a cascade of bank failures. Stage 3. Federal Reserve Intervention. This is the stage that matters most, because the Fed's response will determine whether we get deflation or inflation, depression or debasement, and history tells us exactly which one they will choose. When the reverse repo is gone and the bond market seizes up, the Fed has only one tool left. The money printer. They will restart quantitative easing. They will buy the bonds that nobody else wants. They will create trillions of new dollars to absorb the supply. They will give it a new name. Not QE. Something technical. Something that sounds temporary. Market Functioning Support Facility. Yield Stability Operations. Emergency Liquidity Provision. Whatever they call it, it is money printing, and when they print, inflation reignites. The dollars in your bank account lose value. The cost of everything rises. The wealth transfer from savers to debtors accelerates. The government's debt becomes more manageable in nominal terms, but your purchasing power is destroyed. This is the endgame. The reverse repo drain leads to a treasury market crisis. The crisis forces the Fed to print. The printing destroys the dollar, and the cycle repeats at a higher level of debt, a higher level of inflation, and a lower level of trust in the system. Let me make this personal, because the reverse repo drain is not abstract monetary plumbing. It is about to affect every aspect of your financial life. First, interest rates are going higher and staying higher. Without the reverse repo cushion, there is nothing to prevent Treasury yields from rising. Higher yields mean higher mortgage rates, higher car loan rates, higher credit card rates, higher business loan rates. If you are planning to buy a home, your window is closing. If you have variable rate debt, your payments are going to increase. If your business relies on credit, your costs are going up. The era of cheap money that the reverse repo subsidized is ending. Second, your bank is less safe than you think. The reverse repo provided liquidity to the entire banking system. As it drains, banks are left with less cushion, less margin for error, less ability to handle unexpected withdrawals. The FDIC has $128 billion to insure over $10 trillion in deposits. That is 1.117%. The reverse repo was providing additional systemic liquidity that made that thin insurance layer less dangerous. Without the reverse repo, the banking system is one shock away from crisis. Third, your retirement account is at risk. If the treasury market dislocates, bond funds will take losses. If the stock market sells off due to higher rates, equity funds will decline. If the Fed is forced to print, the real value of your savings will erode. The traditional 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks and 40% bonds, was supposed to protect you. Bonds were supposed to go up when stocks went down, but in an environment where bonds are the source of the crisis, both can fall simultaneously. We saw this in 2022. It is going to happen again, potentially worse. Fourth, inflation will return with a vengeance. When the Fed is forced to restart printing, the inflation that seemed to be cooling will reignite. Your grocery bill will spike. Your insurance premiums will jump. Your rent will increase. Everything you need to live will cost more. The inflation of 2021-2023 was a preview. The main event comes when the reverse repo hits zero and the printer restarts, because this time the Fed will have to print even more. The deficit is bigger, the debt is larger, the foreign buyers are fewer. The amount of money creation needed to stabilize the system will be unprecedented. Fifth, the dollar will weaken globally. Other central banks see the reverse repo drain. They understand the implications. They know the Fed will be forced to print. They are preparing. Central banks are buying gold at record rates. BRICS nations are building alternative payment systems. Countries are reducing dollar reserves. The reverse repo drain is accelerating de-dollarization because it exposes the fundamental fragility of the dollar system. When the dollar weakens, imports get more expensive, oil gets more expensive, electronics get more expensive. Your purchasing power declines even before domestic inflation is factored in. The reverse repo drain is unprecedented in scale. But the pattern of draining liquidity followed by crisis is deeply familiar. 2008, the pre-crisis liquidity drain. In the years before the financial crisis, the Fed was tightening monetary policy. Liquidity was being withdrawn from the system. Banks were leveraged. There was no cushion. When Lehman Brothers failed, there was nothing to absorb the shock. The system froze. Credit markets locked up. Banks stopped lending. The economy nearly collapsed. The Fed had to inject $3.5 trillion to save the system. The reverse repo is following the same pattern. Liquidity being withdrawn, cushion disappearing, leverage remaining high. When the next Lehman moment arrives, there will be no shock absorber. 2019, the repo market crisis. In September 2019, overnight lending rates spiked from 2% to 10% in a single day. The repo market, which is the plumbing of the financial system, seized up. Banks could not lend to each other overnight. The cause was insufficient liquidity in the system. The Fed had been doing quantitative tightening. Cash reserves were too thin. The market broke. The Fed had to inject billions in emergency lending within hours. That 2019 crisis happened when the Fed's balance sheet was $3.8 trillion. Today, it is $7.4 trillion. The system requires far more liquidity to function. And the reverse repo, which provided that liquidity, is almost gone. The parallel is exact. Liquidity drain leads to plumbing failure. Plumbing failure forces Fed intervention. Fed intervention means money printing. Money printing means inflation and dollar debasement. 2023 Silicon Valley Bank. The proximate cause was unrealized losses on bonds. But the underlying cause was a liquidity-constrained system. When depositors ran, there was not enough cash to pay them. The bank sold bonds at a loss. The losses triggered more panic. The bank failed in 48 hours. The reverse repo was still over $2 trillion when SVB failed. It provided enough systemic liquidity to contain the contagion. If SVB had happened with the reverse repo at $480 billion, the outcome might have been very different. The contagion might have spread. More banks might have failed. Now imagine a similar event with the reverse repo at zero. No cushion, no buffer, no containment. The fire spreads to every bank with the same profile, and suddenly a single bank failure becomes a systemic crisis. So, what do you do when the last safety net is disappearing? How do you prepare for the moment when the shock absorbers are gone and every bump becomes a crisis? Step 1. Understand the timeline. The reverse repo is draining at approximately $30 to $50 billion per month. At $480 billion remaining, the facility could hit effective zero within 10 to 16 months. Some analysts project sooner depending on Treasury issuance and Fed policy. This gives you a window, not a large one, not a comfortable one, but enough to act if you move now. Step 2. Reduce exposure to long-duration bonds immediately. Long-term bonds are ground zero for the coming repricing. When the reverse repo hits zero and Treasury yields spike, long-duration bonds will take massive losses. If you hold bond funds in your retirement account, check the duration. Sell anything over 5 years. Move to short-duration instruments if you must stay in fixed income. Treasury bills, money market funds, anything that matures quickly and does not carry interest rate risk. Step 3. Build a physical precious metals position. Gold and silver are the assets that survive every crisis we have discussed. The 2008 crash, the 2020 dislocation, the inflation of 2021 to 2023. Physical metal holds value when paper systems break. If you have $500, buy 15 ounces of silver, physical coins or rounds from a reputable dealer. Store them at home in a secure location.
If you have $2,500, buy 75 ounces of silver and a quarter ounce of gold. Mix metals, mix sizes. Build diversification into your foundation. If you have $10,000, buy 250 to 300 ounces of silver and 1 full ounce of gold. Consider splitting between home storage and a private vault outside the banking system. If you have $50,000 or more, allocate 20% to 30% to physical metals. That is 500 to 1,000 ounces of silver and 3 to 5 ounces of gold. Consider allocated storage in a private vault. Consider international diversification if your position warrants it. Step 4. Hold physical cash outside the banking system. When the reverse repo hits zero and a shock occurs, banks may face liquidity problems. ATMs may have limits, transfers may be delayed. Having 2 to 4 weeks of expenses in physical cash gives you options.
Calculate your essential monthly expenses: rent or mortgage, food, utilities, medicine, transportation. Keep that amount accessible at home, not in a bank, not in an app, in your hands. Step 5. Reduce variable rate debt urgently. When the reverse repo hits zero and rates spike, your variable rate payments will increase. Adjustable mortgages, home equity lines, variable rate credit cards, these become weapons against your finances. Refinance to fixed rates where possible. Pay down balances aggressively. Eliminate variable exposure before the spike arrives. Step 6. Monitor the reverse repo data weekly. The New York Federal Reserve publishes reverse repo data daily. I track it and share updates on this channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications. When the facility drops below $200 billion, the danger zone begins. Below $100 billion, the crisis is imminent. I will alert you when critical thresholds are crossed, but you should also develop your own monitoring habit. Check the data, understand the trend, act while the window is still open. The reverse repo has gone from $2.5 trillion to $480 billion. The safety net is 80% gone. The shock absorbers are almost spent. And when they hit zero, every bump becomes a crisis. The Fed knows this is coming. They are already preparing contingency plans. And there is one specific indicator that reveals when the Fed will be forced to restart the money printer. It has signaled every emergency intervention since 2008. And right now, it is approaching the trigger level faster than at any point in modern history. I break down exactly what that indicator is and when the printer restarts in this video right here. Click it now. The reverse repo countdown is ticking. Make sure you are ready when it hits zero. I will see you there.